In looking at Streeck's five disorders, we come to the fifth disorder. We come finally to the fifth disorder. Global capitalism needs a center. Needs a center secure its periphery and provide it with a credible monetary regime. Now, global capitalism, by its very nature, is capital. Something universal. Universal in the sense that it's not limited to any particular space or time. But like any other universal, it needs to be realized here and now. So there's always this tension between the general appeal of any universal, whether it is capital or whether it is Marxism or whether it is Christianity or Islam. This problem doesn't belong to particularistic ideologies like Judaism or nationalism, for example. But for universal, it's always an issue, the tension between its general requirements and demand and its particular requirements for its realization here and now. That's one thing. The second thing is, and as we saw last time, when capital realizes itself, and historically it realized itself first in certain countries, North Western European countries. So that became by default its center, and everything else became its periphery. And the promise of capitalism is that this periphery will one day become part of center as well. That's the promise. And in a sense, this center always is expanding. To include more regions into the center. So historically, it started from Northwestern Europe, so that was the center. Then North America and Canada became part of it. Australia, New Zealand, and all those countries, and then Japan came into the fold, and maybe South Korea. And then you have a center, but the periphery has its own gradations. So is part of periphery, which are, near to the center. I'll come to it, what makes it part. And then there is a real periphery, and there is the area in between. So capital's relations with this center and periphery near to the center and the middle and the outer periphery. It's a bit of a misnomer. They are different. And and what makes, at least theoretically, what makes what capitalism requires and the fulfillment of that requires makes possible whether a country is located into the center or near to the center, and that will also determine how capital feels itself in that environment. So what capitalism requires are three things. A capitalist individuality committed to accumulation for the sake of accumulation. And then you have capitalist society. It's also known as civil society. Not all societies are civil societies, obviously. Capitalist society are societies in which interpersonal relations and social relations are subsumed to market relations. So capitalist society is in a sense market society, that is society whose values are dominated by market, or a society in which the values which are dominant are values which are market friendly values. And in a sense, in a capitalist society, market or market relations dominate all other relations. Obviously these are ideal types. Actuality, nothing of this sort is present in this clear-cut way. And number three, capitalist state. The system of legitimate power relations, coercive relations, is dominated by the interests of the capital, and the law is the law of capital. Education is the capitalist education. So a center is a place where capitalist individuality, capitalist society, and capitalist state is dominant, and that's the place where capital finds itself at home. And capital always need a state power to impose capitalist laws, but also to make sure that capitalist relations on all these three levels are reproduced constantly. And any opposition to capital is constantly crushed. Obviously, that opposition becomes less and less in the centers. And the periphery, the real periphery is the periphery. The periphery is the one where individuals are not capitalistic individual, or individuality is not capitalistic individuality is not dominant, and society is not society, the relations are not structured on the basis of market relations. Market relations are subordinated. And three, state either is not capitalist, or even if it is a capitalist state, because society and individuals are non-capitalist, it finds it hard to impose and reproduce those values at the level of state and society, and it has to use a lot of coercion and repression and force in order to make possible that market functions in these societies, and the opposition to capitals are well and alive at all levels, and there's always threat of overthrow of the system. That's why this state doesn't has the sort of legitimacy in these societies that it has in here, and that's why this state always needs assistance from the developed states within the centers of the capital. And one of the functions of the required global state for capitalism is to do this sort of a work. Now, if capitalism is universal, or global, then at the global level it needs all those things: individuality, capitalist individuality, and so it needs at the global level individuals who think in terms of the interests of capital in general, and they don't define themselves according to a particular society or nationality. And you need a global society, people who social relations are subordinated to capital, but they are also subordinated to the interests of capital in general. And but you need a global state which imposes the law of capital on the international level, and other things which the state, capitalist state, does at the national level. Now, the contradiction of capitalism is not the modern contradiction. Always been the fact that it has been always organized at the national levels. And it never had global structures. And the global structures which emerged were basically the structures erected by the most powerful states within national capitalism. So before 45 that was Great Britain, and after that it is America. So America tries to play dual role. The nation state, so it is attached to the capital in all three levels, but it also tries to play the role of a global state of a capitalism. But it can't systematically or consistently play that role because it's basically a nation state, and its basic legitimacy is derived from American society, and it owes its legitimacy and its power to the American society. So at the best of time, its global role, that is the role of producing capitalist individuality at the global level, capitalist society at the global level, and capitalist state, and then do all the function of a global state in the interest of capital in general. That role is always a secondary role and subservient to the national interests of the global, and subservient to the national interests of the most powerful capitalist state, that is America. So even at the best of time, the global structures serve the interests of America and the center of the capital, the core center of the capital, and only on a secondary level they serve the interests of the general capital in general. And that was the contradiction which Marx pointed out, and this contradiction is always it's also present at the national level between the individual capitalists trying to maximize their own profit and the requirements of the accumulation at the national level and all that. So that's a general problem of capitalism at every level. And when global capitalism weakens, and when the most powerful global state of capital like America weakens from within, or the core centers of capitalism weaken for whatever reason, then their tendency to tend toward nationalism or gravitate toward nationalism and become overtly nationalistic states which are looking after their own agendas, not only nationally but internationally. And from the viewpoint of capital in general, obviously capitalism suffers as a global force if this happens. So that's what Streeck is talking about here. So we come finally to the fifth thought. Global capital needs a center to secure its periphery and provide it with a credible monetary system. Until 1920s, not just monetary system, but as we saw at all three levels. Until the 1920s, this role was performed by Britain, and from 1945 until the 1970s by the United States, the year in between when the center was missing. I mean, center wasn't missing as such, because the United States always was the most powerful country, and there was no um, there was no possibility that any other country was going to replace it, and the European Union or the countries within like the countries which form European Union now, they are not. I mean, they can possibly do replace United States, but they don't want to. And different powers aspired to take on the role were a time of chaos, economically as well as politically. Stable relations between the currencies of the countries participating in the capitalist world economy are essential for trade and capital flows across national borders, which are in turn essential for capital accumulation. And that role is provided by the American dollar mainly, apart from the eurozone. And one of the main function of American power is to make sure that there are no global contenders to dollar, because trade in dollars doesn't just provide stability to capitalism in general or global capitalism, but it accrues a lot of benefit for Americans, because they can just print money and solve their problem through that, because everybody is compelled to trade in dollars. That's why, in my opinion, for example, one of the main purposes of the American attack against Iraq was the intention of Saddam to move to euro or other currencies other than dollar. Obviously, America cannot tolerate that. Not just in the interest of the global capital, but its own national interests. They need to, and they need to be underwritten by a global banker of last resort. So there is no global banker, and those which act as global bankers of sort, like IMF, etc. They are American institution at heart, and they basically serve the American capital first and not the global capital. And especially periphery, that treat it as just a dumping ground of the waste of capitalism. An effective center is also required to support regimes on the periphery willing to condone the low price extraction of raw material. And the main what makes America inevitable is its military power, and that military power is needed for two purposes, and nobody comes close to. And that's why America is inevitable for capitalism, military power. That is needed to because capitalism it started as a system of exploitation, and that exploitation of periphery is inevitable for it and necessary. I mean that some countries might come out of that periphery, or some countries might move to a bit in the center of periphery rather than at the outer skirts of periphery. But exploitation as such is essential for the sustenance and the working of global capitalism. And you can't sustain that exploitation without American power, and second is to crush any resistance to capitalism and provide support to the client regimes throughout the world, so they can keep repressing their the emergence of anti-capitalist social structures and anti-capitalist individually. Um, so that's why America would remain the sole protector of capitalism in general, because it's the most powerful military uh, nation in the world. But it also would use all those functions to increase its national power. Hence, the contradiction will always remain that America, although it is a nation state and is primarily works for its own national interests, it's also inevitable for the sustenance of the exploitation regime on which the global capitalism is based, and there's no other country which can do it um, with the same success as America can do. So that's the contradiction, and capitalism has been living with this contradiction for a long time. And Streeck thinks that this cannot go on forever, but I don't know why it can't. Unless somebody actually challenges America's technological might or its military might, which seems something in the very distant future, even if realistically possible. So I'll stop here.